excited to have you on. And I've been so enjoying some of your previous interviews, and you were talking about segregation and how not segregation, busing, and how the civil rights movement moved to busing, and you were against that. You wanted to build up the community where they were. Well, when I moved from San Francisco, which had a pretty diverse, the Bay Area, a diverse school that I came from, and believe it or not, when I grew up, I didn't really know what racism was. I was kind of clueless. It didn't occur to me that, and so I got to Las Vegas, and they bussed still. They were still busing. And so I was right on this line, and they would pick up all the Black kids, and then I was the last stop, and then we would go to Clark High School. And so like 2 white kids would get on this bus, and we'd drive to school. And it just seems so weird to me because I was so unfamiliar with it. But I'll tell you what, I don't think the school was better. I don't think the education was better because of that interaction. I felt, and I'm 17 years old, but I felt as if there was a hostility that I had never experienced before when I was in California in a place where there was no busing, but there were Black kids and brown kids and Polynesian type kids and white kids. And there was a great deal of hostility there and kind of an intimidation factor there. And I thought, as an adult, obviously a grandmother looking back, I don't think that was a good move.
It was the worst thing that happened. It explains more of the decline that we're witnessing today than anything to do with legacy of slavery or Jim Crow. The so-called progressive policies of the 60s was much more damaging and harmful to the nation than a lot of things that happened in segregation. And because I realized that as a young civil rights worker back in 1965, when that came down, and I said that the opposite of segregation is desegregation. It is not integration. Because if you argue something is separate and inherently unequal, you're saying anything that is Black is all bad.
Some of these truths that are so profound, but are really so simple. And we've experienced this in our history. And it seems that some people, learn nothing from it. Because the idea of diversity is our strength is, to me, such a lame assertion. Because that would mean that a neighborhood or a whole city that was like 90% Black could not be a great city. And just because a neighborhood is mostly white doesn't mean there's something missing, from it, or that it can't be great. And I'm not for, obviously, segregation, but diversity is our strength. I think it's unity is our strength, unity of spirit and character and morality, our faith, who we are in our DNA as Americans. But if you live in an all-Black city, or a mostly Black city, you don't think that lacks greatness inherently.
But there has always been a contradiction and a hypocrisy on the part of so-called leaders, progressive civil rights leaders too. They never had their children on those buses. When I was working for the Urban League in 1973, I was sent to Boston to monitor the decision that Judge Garrity had to make as to whether the children from Black Roxbury would be bused to Southie in the white community. The judge asked the people suffering the problem what they wanted. And for weeks and a few months, they had town meetings. And the people concluded, we want to improve the quality of our schools where we are. We want more per capita bet on them. And so, but when Judge Garrity was giving these letters, the civil rights leaders and the black lawyers from Harvard said, to hell with what the parents want, bus them. But none of them had their children on those buses. They had them in private school. And so the white parent, I'll never forget this on CBS, she said, yeah, bus them in here, they'll graduate as dumb as our children. Because they were busing them from a superior black school into an inferior white school. But it's been class that has defined the dilemmas that we face. It is elites on both sides. I said to people, I have suffered my last guilty white person and my last rich, angry black.
Race should be over. Here we are, we're talking about race, but we're talking about race, I think, and what that would be, what I would aspire to do, is to talk about race as kind of a matter-of-fact thing. And like, here's a black man, a white woman, sharing the same values and aspirations for their people, the American people, which includes, obviously, especially this historic minority. But it's not about us or them. It's about us, you and me. And it's about Americans.
It is, but it's a big class divide. It's always been.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. That was the important point I should have made, is that the elites are always striving to keep us separate and apart, right, and to keep blacks in their place and to keep whites, I guess, feeling guilty.
Exactly. My young friend Delano Squires, a young conservative, he really stated, he says, this whole race narrative is driven by white who are looking for absolution from crimes they never committed. And blacks are seeking absolutions from injustice they never suffered.
That's beautiful. That's a plaque.
And these are the people who are driving this narrative. If you look at polling data, 80% of black, low-income blacks do not favor defund the police. 60% of blacks do not believe racial animus is a barrier to their thriving. But most black people don't get up and worry about, nor are they confused about their pronoun.
That's nice. That's really nice.
No, but I spent a lot of time in low-income, black, white, brown neighborhoods. 80%, I tell people, my closest friends have letters in front of their names, like X this or X that. And when they get together, they don't talk about race or ethnicity. They talk about overcoming brokenness in their life. And they're seeking redemption and reform and transformation and moral clarity. That's what they're seeking in their life. But this is being really messed over by elites who are manipulating these organs of government to their own comfort, and there's money in it too.
There's a lot of money in it.
Race grievance is a big industry,
and that kind of you know what? I never did an introduction, Bob Woodson, and because we were just started chatting about about my busing. I just thought about it when you were talking. I was bussed. It was probably the last class to be bussed in America. Anyway, it is such a pleasure to have you on here, and I want you, instead of my explaining, who you are as an activist, tell me about being born and growing up in South Philly in the 30s and 40s?
I was born in South Philly. It was a low-income, blue-collar neighborhood. There were no black professionals there. They lived in a whole different section. 98% of the households had a man and a woman raising children. It was like a little village on my street, South Philadelphia. Each of the corners had a black-owned business. The branches had the candy store, the Whitakers, the tailor shop, the Jacksons, the laundry. Children could play safely. Elderly people could walk safely in their community without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren. I never heard a gunfire. We had a black segregated school, the Smith School. Teachers first come in. Plays were held at night for third grade plays so that parents with lunch pails could come and watch their children perform, and they were packed. And we were a close-knit community. And my dad died when I was 9, and my mother was left with 5 children with a 5th grade education. So it meant that I had to rely on my peers, but I was equipped with the kind of values I selected good friends. One of them you will probably know, who became famous, and that's Matt Robinson. He was Gordon on Sesame Street.
No, I don't.
Afro.
Oh, yes. Okay. So tell me about that. Tell me about that friendship.
Well, we were all most of us, so we became a close knit. There were 6 of us. 3 of us are still alive today. We became like a family. We spent time in each other's homes, and so their father became my father, and so they were a year older than me, and so they graduated, went on to college. I was unaffiliated in this community, which meant I had no transportation to parties or whatnot. But I relied on them even to select what courses to take in school. I took the academic course because I could be in class with them, not because of the decision. But they graduated, and so I quit school when I was 17 and went into the Air Force in 1954. And from there, I thought all blacks were, I thought the country was majority black. Even though I had studied geography, the reality was something very different. So when I went into the Air Force, and there were 400 inductees coming in one day, and only 80 were black, I realized it. But it really gave me a wholesome experience where I met people from all over the country. And I was trained in Mississippi, where I found out about racism to the raw. And then I finished high school in the Air Force. I was in the space program, and I was trained in air reconnaissance. And so I flew on the first Earth satellite attempt and got my degree in mathematics. And I took some courses. I have 12 credits from the University of Miami when I couldn't walk on the campus because of segregation.
Well, how did you take the course?
Had extension courses on the base, fully accredited extension courses to accommodate segregation. And so when I got out, I went to, thank God there wasn't affirmative action when I got out, because I was ill prepared, but I went to a small black college, Cheney, the oldest one in the country, with 12 other veterans. We hadn't read a book cover to cover, but we were blessed to have caring professors, and we worked full time and went to school 12 hours. So we had to go all year round. And I was really mentored in how to read. So I finally got a full scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania graduate school. And I worked in a jail, locked behind 3 doors at night when I was getting on it.
What were you doing in the jail?
I was a guard working in a youth prison when I'm at night, and I went to school all day. But I fell in, and I was getting my degree in mathematics, intending to go back to the space program. But in working in the jails, locked behind 3 doors and 65 juveniles, I kind of fell in love with the kids. There were 6 of them I would have adopted if I had the money.
Oh.
I knew that they were in there because of their circumstance, not because of they had any character flaws. But that got me interested in looking at helping community. So I got out, worked in the field of social work, got active in the civil rights movement as a young civil rights activist in Westchester, Pennsylvania. That's the home of Barrett Rustin. And I met Dr. King through Barrett Rustin. But as I told you, but then I got committed to, as Dr. King said, opening the doors of opportunity by lowering racial barriers. You need more than just open doors. You must be prepared to walk through those doors to take advantage of. And so the civil rights movement was not interested in that. And so they used the conditions of poor blacks as the bait. And when the government came in with poverty programs, it created a commodity out of poor people. So they used the demographics of poor blacks as the bait, and the switch occurred when the money occurred. And so the civil rights leaders morphed into a race grievance industry. And so I left the movement on issues of forced busing for integration, and also a lack of concern about helping poor people of all races. So I began more of a universalist and began to help poor people of all races.
Wow. You have quite an extraordinary background. I mean, mathematics, the military, the Air Force, the space program, the civil rights. I mean, you're a Renaissance. And I think that experience that you had, I hadn't heard the part about you working in prison system with youth, must give you, your life isn't in a silo where, you had well-to-do Black parents who sent you to Harvard, and you could be a Claudine Gay that, could look almost down on her fellows in the Black community as if they're, I don't know, others. And instead, you've inhabited all of these different layers and levels and hierarchies and facets of the community. And I think you have an incredible message that needs to be heard. And there are others like you, like a Thomas Sowell, or that speak about personal responsibility and that you don't give a handout. It's better to teach somebody to fish than to hand them a fish dinner, that kind of a thing. Some of these old-fashioned values are actually the very basis of what a renaissance in the Black community would look like or would be based on.
Yeah, a lot of my work at the Woodson Center focused on debunking this myth that somehow the problems of out-of-wedlock birth, violence, unemployment is related to the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. It's just patently untrue. And we document in our book, 1776 Unite, Saving America from Racial Revisionist History and Race Hustle.
That's the one you can download, right?
Right. Yeah, you can download that. And we have a sequel, Pathways to a Renewal of America, where we document that when whites were at their worst, we were at our best.
You know what that's like, Bob? In China, well, the Christian church has always flourished and grown the most and been the strongest whenever they lived under the persecution of a tyrant or communism or something. There's a strength. So, the Christian church in China is 200-300 million strong, and they're living under the worst persecution ever. And what you just said is like that, isn't it?
It really is. The 1776 and progressives like to define America by its birth defect of slavery. America is a country of redemption.
Yes.
That's like telling the story of Christ and stopping at the crucifixion.
Forget the resurrection.
It is true, but it's incomplete. And so what we talk about in our books is we talk about redemption. Pastor Chuck Swindoll says 10% of who we are is our external circumstance. Racism, abusive parents, all of this. But 90% of who we are is the attitude about 10%.
Beautifully put.
And so most of the people that we study about resilience, for example, one of our scholars looked at the records of 6 plantations right after slavery to find out what was the state of the nuclear family. 75% of slave households had a man and a woman raising children.
Doesn't that make your heart just sing to think of that?
And they rushed to get married afterwards. It just soared to get legally married. Only 5% could read. In less than 40 years, 75% could read. Never in the history of the world has a people been able to do this. The Freedmen's Society sent people south to teach them to read. There's nothing we can do because the black churches are doing it.
It's done. It's been done. It's self-reliance. It's what do we need to do? Let's just do it. There's something about that too that reminds me somewhat of what's happening in the Trump administration. There's lots of bumpy roads and everything, but for probably 95%, because I don't know about the other 5%, of everybody that's in that administration, they have a fire in their belly because they know they got to get it done. And they're not going to do a 12 years, or the IRS first had its database, the IRS database that was supposed to be modernized. Modernization is the key word, and that was in 1990. They're still like 10 years off. Well, Elon Musk and all the tech bros are going to just do it. And Duffy over at the Department of, I'm so sorry, you would think I could say these words. The department having to do with planes.
Oh, FAA?
Thank you. And he couldn't say that. The FAA, he said, obviously with that helicopter collision with the plane, that tragedy, he said, they're using floppy disks in some of these air traffic controller rooms. And he said, they've been talking about modernization for, 10, 15 years, whatever ridiculous amount of time it is. I'll tell you what, I could do it. I could just do it myself because it just takes somebody to plan. And he says, we're going to get it done in a year or 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is. Those schools, not schools, those churches in the South, they just decided we're going to get our people literate. And so they just did it.
And they just did it. Now, in one case, we closed the education gap in between 1920 and 1940. It was 8th grade in 1920 for whites and 5th grade for black. Julius Rosenwald, the CEO of Sears, came together with Booker T. Washington, and they partnered. He put up $4 million, and the local black communities raised $4.8 million and established 5,000 Rosenwald Booker T. School. Now, with 5,000 throughout the South, and they had used textbooks, half the budgets of white schools, but yet the education gap in just 20 years closed within 6 months of one another. There was 5 high schools at the turn of the century in New York, Baltimore, Washington, Atlanta, and New Orleans. The same thing. These were the sons and daughters of maids, of butlers. And yet they had used textbooks, crumbling buildings, and half the budgets of white schools. But every one of those black schools out-tested every white school in those cities at the turn of the century. The question is, if the black community could accomplish these great tasks in the presence of racism when it was enshrined in law, why can't we close the gap today when blacks are running all of these systems and they have the highest per capita expenditure? So obviously it's not race. It's not race. But race is being used as a bludgeon against the values of this country because there's great profit in the race grievance industry. There's great profit.
And don't you think, besides the big, big money that's in all of these oppressive policies and programs and businesses that the elites design and run, it seems that there's also a level of pride and control and, look at me. I am the highly educated elite. I hate to keep picking on Claudine Gay and Harvard, but the point is that there's a sense of pride and elevation, perhaps too, because it's better to be the elites of blacks than at the bottom of the big fish in a small pond, and they, I don't know, use the community to gain their own power and status and admiration and notoriety.
Yeah, and protest becomes a substitute for actions to solve the problem.
Carol Swain talks a lot about the elites as well, and the fact that, they did not like her because she grew up in like a 2-room shack with an outhouse, and she actually made it because she believed in herself because somebody else also believed in her, and she got the fire in her belly, and she had tons of siblings that didn't go as far as her. But that when she got into universities and when she was teaching, that she was disdained or there was some kind of animosity toward her because she actually made it, because she made it the way most people make it. It's the fire in their belly, their determination, and the perseverance.
Yes. And it's very interesting that so-called progressives who are supposed to be social justice warriors are much more racist in saying to blacks that you cannot make it because of your own sense of agency. Only if white people change can blacks thrive. That's the essence of white supremacy.
Well, it also makes you dependent upon us, the white guy, to do something or stop doing something, and that is the worst kind of dependence of all.
It really
takes your agency away.
What's even worse is that this whole preoccupation of race deflects attention away from the real crisis in America, and that is we're losing our children.
For sure.
I guess, according to a Harvard study, the highest form of death, number of deaths, it is suicide among upper-income whites. In Silicon Valley, the suicide rate is 6 times the national average for teenagers. In Appalachia...
Is this for blacks or whites?
No, whites.
Okay.
And in Silicon Valley, you have mostly Asians and whites.
Mm-hmm.
They're 2-parent households with incomes of $180,000. Both parents have master's degrees.
So it's despair. It's hollowness.
Are jumping in front of freight trains. 6 times the national average, the suicide rate among those kids. And then Appalachia, it is prescription drug and homicide in the inner city. So it's no wonder if you keep bombarding children by saying you live in a nation that hates you, or if you're white, you are a victimizer, and if you're black, you are a victim. After a while, it shouldn't surprise anyone to the kids say, maybe I'm being accused of this because I'm unworthy. And therefore, maybe I am guilty of what they're saying about me. And it leads to a level of despair to the point where these young people lose a sense of life's meaning. And if you lose a sense of meaning, content and meaning, it shouldn't surprise anyone if you devalue life that you will take your own or take someone else's. They're different sides of the same coin.
That's right. Remember Biden's address? I'm not sure what university, college it was, where he was telling the entire graduating class, I think something like, I don't have the quote in my brain. It was so ugly, I didn't even want to watch it. That basically America hates you to these black graduates. That was one of the...
That's a poisonous message.
On their great day where they were out to go out into the world and to conquer the world, the graduate things. And this old, well, you know, we're old here. This old white man is telling a whole group of black graduates that America hates you. I mean, that is like the most racist and deadly. It's like you have blood on your hands when you're inculcating despair into any group, white or black. And that's what he did there.
Oh, he did. And Obama had the opportunity to be a transformational president when he gave the graduation address at Morehouse College right after, where he says that it's important for a man, a father, to be a dad. And he was castigated by Jesse Jackson and the others. And he backed away from it. Next thing you know, he's saying Trayvon Martin could have been my son. So he decided to be a transformational president, but he lost his nerve and instead became just a spokesperson for the race grievance industry.
You know, it's strange that if you actually, I don't know, it's probably not strange. It seems to me that if he really believed what he was saying, because every father should be a dad, should raise his kid with the mom, you know, why would he capitulate that easily? Because that was a winning message. That was a winning argument.
It really was. Winning for him is having houses in 3 different countries, being rich, living a carefree life. You know, they go the way of greed and self-aggrandizement.
The love of money. You know, what I'm most interested in is moving forward. The policies since 65. Ironically, I talk a lot about immigration. And, well, that's not the ironic thing. The ironic thing is this, that when you're delving into the history of immigration, labor immigration into the United States, I was taught by Numbers USA that, and I'd like to talk, did you know Barbara Jordan?
Yeah.
Oh, I would love to have met her, talked to her about that commission. But anyway, and between 1914 and 1917, this is like the golden age for Black America till 65. They couldn't bring in any immigrants from Europe anymore. And they were taking all the jobs in the North, of course. And so with the war, all the ships stopped coming in, filled with immigrants. And so they had to go down to the South and recruit there, bring them up to the North. And this Black middle class started flourishing. And then the war ends. And basically, very, very quickly, those ships start coming in again. But the Black leadership, which was a very different thing in those days, they learned something. Immigration was inherently inflating the labor supply clearly has a negative effect on those originally within that labor pool. And jobs are harder to get because there's just way too many or many more people competing for the same jobs. And so in 1924, they passed the Immigration Act of 1924, and it essentially slashed immigration from overseas, well, obviously from outside the border, and the middle class of Black America exploded from 24 to 64. Exploded. It's like the golden age of middle class Black America. And then the very year, 64, I guess that was, the Civil Rights Act was passed. I think that was it. Well, the very next year, they passed the 65 Immigration Reform Act, opening the floodgates. And so when they were doing so much for the Black community of America, I presume, by passing the Civil Rights Act, they countered it with something that utterly destroyed the very environment that was conducive and cultivated and exploded the Black middle class. During 24 to 64, the white middle class grew 2 times in size. The Black middle class grew 4x. So that's my layup to saying that there are things that now in the Trump administration, you and I and all of those who are of the same mind and goal, we have an opportunity that could be easily lost if right decisions were not made because the right voices aren't being listened to, or it could be the beginning, not just the golden age of America, but I don't think the golden age of America is going to be the golden age of America unless it's a golden age for Americans, including Black Americans. And so immigration, workforce training, education is really something that I think, and by the way, and the morality, character training of all American youth, because we've just slaughtered them in that area. But let's talk a little bit about right now what we can do.
Well, first of all, I think what we can do, and you pointed this out, we can learn from the past. There's a great, going about the space program, there's a great line in Hidden Figures. You remember the movie that 2017 that was so popular about the space program, about Kathleen Johnson, the Black mathematician?
Oh, I loved that movie.
Wasn't that outstanding? Well, there was a certain point in there when they were trying to figure out how to move from an elliptical orbit to a spherical, I think, orbit, circular orbit. Mm-hmm. And she said, wait a minute, maybe we're looking in the wrong place. Why don't we look back? And she ran to the back of the room and picked up 1,000-year-old Euclidean geometry.
Oh, I remember her going through it.
Remember going through it? She said, there. And they took an item from Euclidean geometry that was 1,000 years old, and it worked. We need to go back into and looking in the past to ask ourselves if Blacks in the 20s had a higher business formation rate than anyone in the country. We had the highest marriage rate anywhere in the country. What you talked about is the Black Wall Streets in the Hayti section of Durham, North Carolina, the Black Bottom in Detroit, the Bronzeville section in Chicago in 1919. There were 731 Black-owned businesses. Blacks had $100 million in real estate assets. And this was all capital that was used. In Baltimore in 1868, when Blacks were fired from the docks, they formed their own railroad and successfully the railroad from Boston, well, Baltimore to Boston, that hired 1,000 people, including whites. There are just endless stories of business formation at a time when whites were at their worst. And what was fueling this outbreak of entrepreneurship? We had the highest, any group's participation in the economy has more to do with their small business formation rates.
Yes. Tell me about that.
According to David Birch and others, a healthy economy generates about 2.5 businesses per 1,000 people per year. The Black community today is 3 businesses per 100,000 per year. But back in the 1920s and 1930s, we had the highest business formation rates. When we were denied access to hotels, we built our own.
Of course. What else would you do, right?
The Calvert Hotel in Miami, the St. Teresa in New York, the St. Charles in Chicago. I could go on and on and on. And so to answer your question, it was the values that we looked at America as one of the only places that provided the principles and values, the foundation upon which somebody who was segregated and deprived could thrive. And so we went to our own burial societies because we were denied insurance. So we would put $1 in the collection plate, but another plate would be for burial insurance. And people like A.D. Gaston in Alabama collected the money from these burial societies and formed his own bank. And A.D. Gaston, I'll never forget him. He was 105, I think, when he died. He said, it's better to say I is rich than I am poor.
That is so good. That sounds like it comes right out of the book of Proverbs. I mean, literally, that belongs there.
It's better to say
I is rich than I am poor.
At the time of the bus, Montgomery bus boycott, A.D. Gaston, why don't I just buy the bus company?
Did he have the money in his own right, or did he get it from the community?
He had the money.
He did have the money.
He had the money. He had his own hotel. He was the Bill Gates of Black America at the time. Again, he had a 6th grade education. S.B. Fuller is another one, uneducated, but owned newspapers, Fuller Brush Company.
Oh, gosh, I love that. The Fuller Brush Company, when they used to come around and knock on your door and sell you brushes.
We had bowling alleys, we had country clubs, all of the things that we don't have today. And so you cannot say that America is the only country on the face of the earth where 20 people could be born slaves and died millionaire. And we document all this in our books.
The 1776 book, and it's
animated.
Is it the Bob Woodson Institute or Center?
Our Woodson, it's called Woodson Center. WoodsonCenter.org. You go in there. We have an animated series for kids that's now been downloaded 500,000 times. Or we take some figures from history, and we have a 6-minute animation. You got to go online and see it. It's just
I went to the website, but I apparently missed the animation, so I am going to go back because that sounds very exciting. That's the kind of education. You know, telling a story about a guy who buys a bus line or builds a railroad because people got fired, or, you know, I can't stay in a hotel and I build a hotel, but doing it not from a standpoint of animosity or revenge or, you know, anger, but from, well, I'm self-reliant. I've got the money. I'm just going to I have a problem now. I'm going to solve the problem. That's what entrepreneurs are.
Look, through enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you this, that there was a man named Elijah McCoy, who was the son of runaway slaves. And he was raised in Canada and got an engineering degree. And he came back to America and worked for the Chicago Railroad. And because he was black, they gave him the worst, most dangerous job, and that is to oil the wheels on the trains. Well, he invented the machine that would automatically oil the trains. And as a consequence, trains were able to travel 20 to 30 miles faster, and it revolutionized the whole industry. And he is in the Inventors Hall of Fame. And this is the part. People tried to develop knockoffs, but the owners of the railroad said, we want the original, the McCoy. We want the real
McCoy. That is an amazing story. Those are so delightful.
And over the world, but it came from a black inventor. And so these are the kind of stories that you can only find in America.
That's right. That's right. And to go back to this idea that, you teach somebody to fish, you don't, give them a fish dinner. You teach somebody, you train them. Webster's dictionary, the 1828 dictionary, when you looked at the definition of education there, I used to tell my kids this, it was the inculcation, I'm not quoting it word for word, but the inculcation of manners. That was like kind of the old-fashioned term to say manners, like how you behave in society, morality, ethics, these kinds of things. This is so key to being an entrepreneur or to being great in the military or to being, somebody who does great things, even if that great thing is just being a father to 2 kids or 3 kids or whatever, with a wife and a little house in a blue-collar job. That's a hero, because the character and that family, that's greater riches than many people accumulate in a lifetime. And so this inculcation of moral courage and character is important, but also training in a trade. And that is not to exclude, obviously, higher education. But I believe that we have overrated or emphasized, let's put it that way, going to university, which, 40 years ago, that wasn't it. I mean, it's an education to get training to be able to be a highly skilled blue-collar worker. And since essentially you're saying you're only successful and we're going to fund and support university education, what about the massive people that really don't want to go and learn about queer studies in the university system? Not to say there's nothing good about universities. So what I'm getting at in this roundabout way is that we have an opportunity right now, all the people out there in America who care about this, to say, let's get something done in training. Right now, I just looked at the work training for warriors, something like that organization, and it was to train vets. She said, the CEO and co-founder said, for 200 slots to get training to be welders, which is a high-skilled job, blue-collar job, 9,000 vets applied for those 200 positions. Every 16 weeks, they can take somebody who doesn't weld at all and make him an expert craftsman in welding. And we are short in America today 500,000 tradesmen, men who are skilled, well, women too, but men who are skilled in high value, skilled blue collar work. My grandpa started out as a welder and ended up, being 20, 30 years with the company in Pennsylvania, Warren, Pennsylvania. And so I guess what I'm saying is I've been trying to figure out how to make something like this happen. Obviously, it's not up to me. I'm not the man to do this job, but I want to get people excited about, can we get Donald Trump, the Trump administration? You probably have good contacts there. I saw you, by the way, Martin Luther King Day. That was the best Martin Luther King thing I've ever seen at the White House. Or I don't know if it was actually in the White House when President Trump called you out. Can we get like a nationwide training program going, not just dribble-drabbling it, but in 2 years, let's get 500,000 inner city and Appalachian and whites, wherever they are, trained in high-skilled blue-collar labor. Would that be a goal to work for?
It really is. The Woodson Center is working with some grassroots Josephs, as we call them. That's our model. Josephs from Genesis.
Yes, that's wonderful.
And we looking for good pharaohs. That's who funds the Woodson Center. Good pharaoh. And Josephs are two types: those who are in poverty but not of poverty, but they're not bitter either.
Right.
And
That's
they're
the key.
also their God. Mm-hmm. And then the other type of Josephs are those who had fallen, who were drug addicts and prostitutes, but through God's grace, they became redeemed. And they become witnesses to others that you don't have to stay fallen, you can say. But we have found that some of our Josephs, like in Las Vegas, Hope for Prisoners is a model, the program that they have about 5,000 people that they work with who are coming out of prison. But they have opened recently an opportunity, a village, where skills trades school are built right inside the prison.
I love that. What is the name of the organization, Bob?
For Prisoners, John Ponder.
Hope for Prisoners.
Hope for Prisoners is a model for where they're training people. They actually built a skills training center where plumbers, electricians, carpenters can be trained in. A man last week came out, certified plumber, making $26 an hour, coming out of prison.
That is wonderful. That's a dream of mine, too. When I saw what they had done, a lot of it gets a bad rap by some, but Bukele in El Salvador, I'll send you the video because you may not have seen it, but they show these massive factories, clean, beautiful factories, and they're doing horticulture. They're sewing sewing clothing for maybe police officers and firemen. They're building desks and furniture for schools. So they're actually giving back to their community, learning a trade, having a purpose, even though they're in prison because they're all gang members, all of them. But we're talking about tens and tens of thousands of now highly skilled labor. They're in prisons, but they're producing something for themselves and their country. And I'm so excited to hear about the program you're talking about. So they're doing that in Las Vegas.
We're trying to raise about $50 million into what we call a Joseph Fund, where 100% of the money will go out the door to groups like this.
Oh.
We're also helping a model. The Pineywood School is a 115-year-old boarding school near Jackson, Mississippi. They're still training kids from the most deprived backgrounds. 100% go on to college. Mandatory work, mandatory chapel, no cell phones, and the kids are just thriving. But again, they're struggling. And I'm saying to conservatives that we need, these people represent a ground game. If you want to convict people to the values of the founders, you're not going to do it by issuing white papers or giving sermons about it. You're going to have to support people like John Ponder and others and Will Crosley at the Pineywood School. You need to support and fund people whose actions embody those principles in their actions.
That's right.
And those actions have the consequence of improving the quality of life. So if you want to convict people to these principles, say, well, fund it, and you will see that these values transform and redeem lives. People want to see a sermon. They don't want to hear any more sermon.
Yeah, they want to see it. They want to feel it and experience it.
Want to feel it. And so people who share our perspective and our values, we need to invest in those that exemplify those values. And that's what we're trying to do.
Well, this is why I've been excited to talk to you, because I have all these same and similar ideas and passions here. And I really believe that for Republicans, I don't believe that they have, well, they clearly don't have a solid footing in the Black community. I believe the Democrats, my mom grew up Irish Catholic. She was obviously a Democrat for her entire life because the Kennedys were like royalty. And, that's the way Irish Catholics grew up. But when she finally voted for Ronald Reagan and she prayed God for forgiveness because she wasn't sure it was supposed to happen, you got to get the person who was once in the other party that is really not doing the best for their constituencies. They're really feeding off their constituencies to actually see and make a shift, the Overton window or a paradigm shift, so that they're firmly ensconced in a party that is going to actually contribute mightily to a renaissance and a renovation, a renewal, and a reform. And I fear for the Trump administration, and especially for Congress, the Republicans in Congress, that if this is not done, not as a handout for the Black community, not a handout, but constructive, results-oriented engagement that's funded, that in 2 years and 4 years, all those gains, the optimism will be lost. Because if you don't get the real problem, and I'm hoping they're going to get the real problem, understand it.
I agree with you. I agree with a lot of what they're doing, not the way they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
They need to, you cannot cut your way into the future. I believe you should weed and seed. Take out the bad stuff, but also plant good stuff.
That's right.
At the same time that you're taking away, describe to people what you're going to support.
That's
right. The way you reduce government is reduce people's dependency on it by supporting civic institutions who can do it more efficiently and more effectively. But you should say to people, there's an alternative way.
And bypass the race profiteers.
Exactly. That's what you need to do. But unfortunately, they don't seem to be able to tell the difference between Harriet Tubman and ER. They were taking down the Harriet Tubman website and only to have to put it back because know the difference between some of them don't know the difference between Harriet Tubman.
I miss that story, Bob.
They stopped showing the Tuskegee Airmen in the Naval Training Academy only to have to put it back. That's the kind of stupid stuff.
That's dumb. But I'll tell you what, we don't need a blue ribbon committee that firstly puts in a bunch of these elites. It's got to be the roll up your sleeves, the blue collars, the people that are out there in the prisons getting things done. It's got to be the school marms. I said that on purpose. Down in Mississippi or wherever that are actually having success, and then to bypass the political. Well, what we saw at USAID, we saw what's happening to our money in America. That was a money laundering scheme. And so many of these race programs or programs related to race, gender, etc., they're just clearinghouses for money laundering. And we need to bypass that and go to that prison outreach. But it's not just an outreach. It's a training institute. That means something. Those men. I interviewed Pastor Lowry out of Chicago, and he said that Chicago got a bunch of money to do training. Oh, it was a Biden thing. It had to do with the $1 trillion, $1.9 trillion, whatever it was. Yeah. And he said, so they came to pastors and people like me and said, can you find young men, youth that want to be trained? And he went out and he said, you know what? I found young guys, kids, adults, and they had the look in their eye. Yes, I want to be trained. They weren't sitting there thinking about like their next meth, dose of meth or something, or smoking a joint. They said, yeah, I want to do that. Guess what? It never happened. None of the training ever. And that's what we need to do in these 3 years, 4 years. So what's your idea? Like the Bob Woodson Center wants to raise money, which I didn't know. So, this is coming up unexpectedly, but you're wanting to raise money so that you can have, I would assume, a board that would be deciding who would receive the funding.
Doing this for about 44 years. So we've got a good experience in knowing how to vet people. And these are organizations that have been around for years. They're proven effective. All they need is to close the gap between what they can afford to do and what they're capable of doing.
And that's the kind of stuff.
So we've studied them years, and we know they're ready. The Partywood School is ready to take off. So is Hope for Prisoners. Men of Valor is a prison reentry program in Nashville, Tennessee. So there are models around that accomplish exactly what you're talking about, providing skilled labor with people armed with the right attitudes.
That's right. Do you have any thoughts on the mass immigration? I'm not necessarily talking about illegal immigration. That's an issue, of course. But the mass visa immigration that essentially is bringing literally millions of workers, temporary workers, into the United States. It seems to me with unemployment, which is not really at 4.2 or 5%, whatever they're saying, and Trump's team is not lying, it's just the way they calculate it now to mask the fact that the effective unemployment rate is closer to 25%. Do you think we should be bringing in foreign cheap labor when we've got so many unemployed blacks and whites as well?
Absolutely not. I think we should booster those institutions like John Ponder and Men of Valor who are taking, repossessing the skills of people and repositioning them to take these jobs. We just need to invest in people who have proven to be effective. And our grassroots Josephs have done so.
Have you talked to anybody at the Department of Labor, Department of Education, Immigration, Commerce?
I tried to talk with the White House Policy Office, and spent about an hour and a half talking with some officials there to let them know that we are friendly and that we would be more than willing to come in and advise their senior staff and introduce them to people whose actions are compatible with their own.
Have you heard back from the White House Policy Office?
Nope, no, we haven't. And that's why they have to flip-flopping on some of these things they're doing. They're discontinuing some things. They get an outcry, then that ruins their credibility.
Yeah.
The very people in the Black community who supported them, they seem to be turning their backs on them. Not intentionally, I think, but inadvertently turning their backs. And that's not good.
No. Do you get the sense? I get the sense from X, that's how I see these things, that for those white-collar tech workers, accountants, customer service people, that's all those jobs are being taken by the hundreds of thousands, either offshoring them to America, to India, or they're bringing temporary workers here to America to take those jobs after they lay off a bunch of Americans. So I'm seeing mostly that. But you have an insight into another community. By the way, those people are getting very upset, which really worries me, because I know that Kamala Harris would have been the nightmare the nightmare of nightmares. So I want President Trump and his team to succeed for the future, not just for now, but for the future. What are you seeing in the Black community or any community that you're working with?
Again, there are islands of excellence where people are being redeemed and transformed and being made work ready. They need an opportunity. They need to know that once they do change and become redeemed, that there will be some place for them to work. You know, there was a guy, blue-collar guy, who said, I'm a single dad raising my 16-year-old son. He says, and I used to work in a plant making a lot of money, and I'm laid off. He says, but I'm told that we taking things offshore, that the hat that I'm wearing was made in China, my pants was made someplace else, my shoes elsewhere. And I'm supposed to be convinced that I can get it cheaper. He said, I'll pay more for it if I have a chance to work for it.
I said that 2 days ago. I said, if my neighbor will have a job, I'll pay twice as much for my toaster.
I pay more for something.
That's right. I don't want a cheap ball cap, but
it's $2 cheaper. Let me pay full price for it if it means it's going to be American workers.
It's building generational wealth and it's rebuilding communities. And the 60s and 70s and 80s, and it started with probably your civil rights organization's huge missteps, if you want to be kind, but it also started with this mass immigration that, again, took so many of the gains and started eroding at them. Yes. And then, of course, the fact that broken families or families that were never created, these are all intertwined things. And I just know that if President Trump did something big, and I don't mean flashy, okay, by big, but I mean it made a difference, not for 200 people here, 400 people in this city, and 300 people in that city, but made a difference for, there's a 500,000 shortage in blue collar, skilled or factory kind of work. 500,000. Do you know who Bob Rowe is? I mean,